Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and it's Terminator Librarian time. This is the last of the Terminators from the Leviathan box set. The others I've painted up on the channel so far, and I wanted to do something a little bit different with this model. Really set out to do the glowing runes, not something I do very often, sort of glow effects. And then halfway through the build I got into deciding I was going to do some gun blasts, so stick through the video and see the things I've done differently to this model rather than a normal paint scheme. But it is a normal paint scheme first, and this does reflect very much what I did on the other Terminators on the channel. So I sprayed it with black and then spray bolt gun metal afterwards. Again, something I do a lot. I really love painting on metallics. We'll touch again on that later. Starting off the same way, Retributor armour onto those kind of brass areas across the model to give it that kind of aged, kind of a little bit more luxurious feel, if that's even a word for armour, across kind of skulls, rivets, all the sections you can see there. Moving on to Macragge blue here, because librarians traditionally in that kind of blue. I think Macragge blue works quite well, so I suppose in a way this is also an ultramarines colour scheme if you think about it that way. And I'm getting this onto all the armour panels, but being careful, as you saw there, not to get the paint down into the gaps and cracks of the runes, and also avoiding the kind of gems that are dotted all over the armour. That's where the psychic power kind of comes from. It was this point of the build that I decided, right, I fancy doing gun blast, so I took some 1mm pinning wire, dropped it into the end of the barrel that I'd drilled out, cut it to length, then at that point used that third piece, matching it against two other slightly longer pieces, and I'm painting the blue on there so I know this is where the metal is out of the barrel, so I know this is the bit I'm going to cover with green stuff. Now, I'd never really done this before. I'd seen some 3D printed gun blasts and stuff and thought, could I do that with green stuff? So if there's a better technique out there, then tell me about it and do that. But this is kind of what I did. So I made a kind of cone of green stuff onto the end of that wire, and then really just messed about with a sculpting tool, with the idea being that the wider part would be down near the barrel and then it would thin out at the top. And I literally took a sculpting tool, and the green stuff has had maybe half an hour, 40 minutes to kind of solidify up a little bit so it's not too sticky, and I'm just sort of scraping in little bumps and ridges, trying to tease the green stuff out into little kind of what look like sort of fire effects, and I just literally play for a few minutes. I do both of them like that, and I've lined them up next to each other to think, right, make them look vaguely similar. I don't want them identical, but you want this kind of same length and some similar features, and rounded out the bottom, so leaving a little bit of that blue showing, because I know then I've not made it too big, and it would slot into the gun quite nicely. I pushed the two of them together like you can see here, and then just slightly off camera I got the thing wrong, just making sure that I've got them lined up with the barrels properly. So I'm just dropping the end of those pins into the barrels. I then just folded those pins over, stuck them in some blue tack on a pot and let them dry overnight, and that's the gun blasts. Really quite simple and easy, although I do use green stuff a fair bit, so obviously manipulating the green stuff wasn't too hard for me. But if you are someone that's new to it, just take your time, experiment and play. I didn't use very much green stuff at all, a tiny amount. I carried on with the paint scheme, so using the same bone white that I've just undercoated the gun blasts, dropping onto all the purity seals and those pieces there, and then moving on to the crux terminatus. Now, when you're painting this, because I've painted it with metallic undercoats, you've got to be really careful to get that grey into all the gaps and cracks around that crux terminatus. Whereas I avoided going into the gaps with the runic symbols, you want to get into all the gaps and all the edges and all that kind of things of the crux terminatus, because the beauty of the metallic undercoat is if you miss bits, it looks like, battle damage, it looks where the paint's chipped off the armour. Obviously the crux terminatus meant to be made out of stone, so you've got to be really careful to get all those gaps and angles. Similar when you move on to the red schemes here, when I'm painting the tops of purity seals, the wax areas, being really careful to cover every last part. But when I'm onto the gun, for example, you can afford to be a little bit messier. If you miss a bit of the gun casing in red, it doesn't matter. It just looks like the gun's taken some damage and some of that paint has chipped off, during battle. So moving on through the normal scheme, when you come to the cables and stuff on the chest, I've seen some really nice paint schemes this librarian where they've done these really sort of colourful and interesting. I kept it fairly muted and just went with Abaddon Black because I wanted to do the runic areas bright, and I felt that if I was going to do some bright cabling and those kind of things, it would probably have a little bit too much across the armour, but that's just, again, for myself. Bit of flat brown onto the book with the same principle, taking that brown onto any of the leather areas and making sure with the gaps and cracks here, you want to make sure you're getting really into them all so that you're not having any of that metallic showing through. So definite benefits and drawbacks to paint, undercoating metallics. The benefit is you can skip all of that painting metallic stage, all the metal areas on this model I've not done anything with other than the spray. Drawbacks can be that, if you miss these metallics on some areas, it can look a bit odd, but battle damage on armour. Now I'm going around and taking and just touching up across the model. For some reason I don't normally make too many mistakes, but I made quite a few here. So I caught a bit of blue onto the axes I've been painting. I've managed to drop a bit of red up onto the hopper of the ammo there, so I'm just taking a metallic colour and touching up, and I do also do a bit of touching up on some of the blue where I dropped a bit of red on, and this, that, the other. And that's an important stage I don't talk about very often actually. Once you've done your base coat, just go and touch up. Right, so it was this stage when I now cut down the pinning wire off those gun blasts that we'd made, and now just getting it stuck into the barrels, and then this can now join into the painting scheme of the rest of the model. So that's just been super good in there. Quite happy with how they look, you know, the fire effects look on this model there. And now we're going to carry on painting those blast effects within the paint scheme. So now it's a Seraphim Sepia wash right across every single part of the model to a good thickness. Don't let it pool up anywhere, but you want to sort of dull the colours down on this, and this will then drop into all the gaps and cracks and everything as well, and it'll add to the kind of effect. If you've missed areas where there was metallics, it sort of makes it look slightly rusty and whatever, but you will see what it doesn't do is it doesn't cover over the metallic lines that are showing where the runes are on the shins and things. So now I'm going through the model and taking every paint we've already used and just taking some highlighting areas. See there, just dropping the blue onto the raised areas just to put some highlights into this armour. Now it is the same colour we've already used, but because that shade, that Seraphim Sepia, will have knocked back all the kind of tones of the paints we originally used, this just brings it back up again. Now if you wanted to go to the next level, you could then take a lighter colour of all the ones we've used and do another highlighting layer, and it would really make the model pop. Personally, for how I like my models to look, I don't like that kind of over highlighted kind of more the Games Workshop heavy metal style. Never particularly been a fan, so I like to keep it quite muted. And to be honest, from a distance, sometimes you can't really tell the Games Workshop ones are done to all those levels. So for me, because I'm more of a gaming army style, I like to keep it with a couple of highlight layers that actually do give, for me, enough detail. But if you wanted to revisit, you absolutely could. So going through all those different colours, you there onto the flesh as well. Painting faces is something that, I don't really go into too much detail. Well, I probably should, teach myself some more skills, but I like to keep it, again, quite basic, simple effects. Now, what I've not shown on the camera is I have dropped a little bit of black into the eyes and then a tiny dot of white into the eyes as well, but very, very small, so it can barely be seen, because, again, from a distance, a real person, you can barely see the kind of eyes. Now moving on to the gun blast, this was the important thing. This was a bit of an experiment with contrast paints really. So I'm using 4 contrast paints, the Apothecary White, Abaddon Yellow, Flesh Tearers Red and Black Legion, and literally working along the blast. So the white at the very ends as it comes out of the barrel, then moving into the yellow, moving into maybe 80% of it, dropping the red on the very ends, but also smearing some of that red backwards. And the final colour is the black, and I'm just putting very, very small amounts of that across the entire gun blast and then spreading it around. And it came out reasonably well, for a fairly quick scheme. Relatively happy with how this came out. You could do it with standard paints, but I'm still very much in a phase where I'm experimenting with contrast paints. So I'm quite happy with how that looked before the glowing effects. And if I'm honest, I was really reviewing it to say, do I want to do the glow effects or not? But I decided I did. So I'm now taking some off-white from Vallejo and painting that onto all the gems that are across the model, and this is just pure off-white paint. The gems, you could do a straight colour now, but I thought I'd try doing something different with some contrast mediums and things. Now, to get the white into all the cracks and crevices, I've mixed the Vallejo Off White with thinner medium so that it will flow into all those gaps easier. You could do this with water and it will work virtually as well, but to use a proper medium I think just makes it slightly nicer. Now here's the thing about coming back to models. At this point in the sort of the paint scheme, I technically finished the flames, but I kept looking and thinking I want to just drop a little bit of extra detail on. So I took a bit of deep yellow, again from Vallejo, and just dropped some extra little yellow patches across the flames just to make it a little bit nicer. So you can always revisit. Now when the gems are dried, a little bit of Vallejo White purely on the very top areas of the gems to give a little bit of just extra brightness. It doesn't really stand out in here, the white and the off-white with this camera, because it's only an iPhone. It looks very similar, but it isn't. So now this is what I'm talking about, experimentation. I've picked up some contrast medium from Games Workshop, mixed it with a very bright Vallejo Scorpion Green and painting it on to those gems, and it kind of works exactly like the contrast paint did on the flames or on armour. It ran across the model, and that white area made it a bit brighter than the rest of it. I've tried to sort of show that. Now I'm taking that same mix, that contrast medium, and I'm going round with this colour and dropping it into things like here. You can see into the eye slot, the nose slot on the skull there, but I also drop it into the gap around his cheek, who you see in the face there, and I take it into some random armour panels to give that kind of glow effect. So you see on the hand there, I've painted it into his palm and all the cracks there. And now it's time to put it into the actual cracks where the runes are. Now, because when we put that white colour into these runes, we didn't do it, or I didn't do it across all of the gaps. I did it really on the central panel worked out. You can see on the bottom ridge line, there isn't any. In the very top ridge line, I didn't put any in. And that means when we put the contrast in on all the ridges of the armour, it will really pop where we've put the white previously, and where there wasn't the white previously, it'll be slightly duller. And that's it. That is all the scheme done. I hope that kind of made some sort of sense as I was talking through there. Trying a few different techniques for myself. First time I've ever done any kind of sculpted gun blasts, and remarkably the first ones I was quite happy with. All the paints I've used are there on the left if you want to match. If not, hopefully you've taken some inspiration from it. I'm quite happy with how this model has turned out. Pushed myself into some areas I don't normally do with some glowy rune effects and things, and again, and sculpting some blast markers. So I enjoyed myself. I hope you did as well. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and I'll see you on another video.